Hi. I hope you'll enjoy the episode you're about to listen to, but you should know that this podcast would not be possible without the generous support of some of our listeners who contribute either through Patreon or directly on our Buzzsprout website. I'd like to thank Brian Heyer, Brandon and Sarah Gierach, Steve Zank, Scott Henrich, Deborah Hilger, Mikhail Legner, Abigail and Noah Broyles, and Rosa. Thank you. Hi, welcome to another episode of the Lutheran History Podcast. Today we have a special guest. We have Professor Nathan Ericson from Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary, and rather than talk about a particular single topic in Lutheran history, he's going to talk to us today about some of the resources available, both as the seminary library director and a little bit also about his role as the editor of Wisconsin Lutheran Quarterly. So, Professor Ericson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, look forward to our discussion today. And part of the goals of this is to help people who maybe are into research to use some of the many tools that is available through the seminary and elsewhere. So first question is, many listeners may not realize how central the seminary library is to the ongoing theological life of the Wisconsin Synod. So how would you describe the mission of the library today?
I'd say our first role really is to serve the students who are enrolled in the various programs of Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary, of course. Most people will think of our on-campus residential MDiv program, maybe if they're familiar with the seminary. That's where we prepare our future pastors. But there's also our program of continuing education for pastors who are out there in the field. Some are enrolled in our Masters of Sacred Theology program, and some are just taking things class to class. And so they study in person during summer quarter and winterim, but many of them are also online. So we try to serve all those students in different ways, both with our print resources, mailing those out to people, and with our online resources. So that's one big group, our students, and obviously our first audience. But beyond that, really, we serve all of our pastors and other called workers as they're doing research just for sermons week to week, or Bible classes, or papers that they might be writing. Really, we serve all members of our synod and some local community members too, as they're interested in theological reading, theological research. In fact, we have a couple of scholars here right now who are working on a book on the papal letters from the early church in the 4th century, and they're using some of their own resources, but also things that we have available here. And so really, we see as our purpose to make available the resources that are needed by each of those groups. If I could just add on, one task of a library, you think of buying books, adding books. We also get rid of books to make more space for future books or books that aren't relevant anymore. But that's really a difficult thing here because there are countless times when editing an article, for example, I will see a reference I need to check and look up the book and be happy to say, oh, we have that book. And also I'm glad that no one threw it out because you just don't know what will be useful down the line somewhere. So we try to serve all those audiences and really be a repository of theological information that's interesting for Lutherans.
Yeah, just real quick, what happens to those books that need to be cycled out?
I send them to our students, and they have ways of getting rid of them. We do sell things off on a sale shelf. You try to put them in the dumpster in the middle of the night so no one looks and thinks, why are people throwing out books? But the truth is, if you ever see that, it's because they've been carefully thought out. Maybe they've been replaced by a new edition. And yeah, it's nothing glorious. You just throw them out.
You make them disappear, huh?
Yeah, right, yeah.
So another follow-up question is too, as a pastor who kind of uses the library now for almost a decade only in the kind of satellite distance thing, I've really come to appreciate the digital resources available through the library. I can't imagine some of the projects I've carried out without the use of that. So can you tell us a bit more about that? How has the role of the theological library changed in this digital age that we've been in now for a couple decades?
Yeah, when I talk to people about the library, often someone will quip half jokingly, "Oh, do you still have books now?" And the answer is yes, of course, we do still have books. In fact, really, theological publishing is maybe going stronger than it ever has right now. And maybe that's just a product even of the digital age, of all the research and communication that can really be done now that was a little bit more difficult to do before. It took more time or cost more. But at the same time, a lot of our work does involve giving library users access to digital resources such as ebooks and online databases of journal articles and the things that we digitize here ourselves. And then also administering the tools necessary to make all that possible, like the authentication that you need for licensed resources. So there's a lot of technological and digital work that we do too. Yeah, so both things that others produce and things that we're able to provide on our own right here.
Yeah, excellent. We'll talk more about the collections later on, but also don't want to brush past the fact that you are also have a role responsible for the Wisconsin Lutheran Quarterly, a
Mhm.
publication that's been out there for over 100 years now. So why is it important for a confessional Lutheran church body like the WELS to have this theological journal?
I think you could frame that by asking the question, what would the world be like if there were no confessional Lutheran theological journals out there? And maybe there you have your answer. The answer is that we want our voice, a voice of sound biblical teaching, to be getting out there to the world. And because of that, I think it's important for us to be publishing things really in a variety of ways, whether that's speaking in person, blogs, podcasts, and things like that, and but also at the scholarly level too, and as a publication that's especially intended for our pastors to have available to them to read for the sake of scholarship, for the sake of education, and to address issues that come up in the church. Historically, that's what the quarterly has been used for. And maybe just to add on to that, for several years now, maybe 10 or 12 even, Wisconsin Quarterly has been available, articles have been available to libraries and scholars around the world through the Atlas Serials Plus online database that different places subscribe to. And that extends our reach considerably more than was just the print subscription being mailed out. So I just got the report back from that for the past year, and our articles over the years consistently have made up 1% of the hits in this database that contains 775 journals in total. And so I think that's a really good
Wow.
percentage if we're one out of 775 journals, but are making up one out of 100 hits. And so, taking a look at that a little deeper, around the world, our articles are accessed about 8,000 times each year. And that doesn't count our local usage here at the seminary. So, we're happy that the word is getting out both to people who are subscribers, but also people who have access in other places to the journal.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite impressive. Like you said, just statistically and considering our somewhat smaller size as a denomination to have that kind of reach. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're excited about that.
Yeah, excellent. So just as you edit, of course, you're not just printing or publishing historical articles. You got the four branches of theology and like you said, news and notes and all sorts of stuff. But just as an editor, how do you strike a balance between when it's called for historical scholarship along with doctrinal clarity and also contemporary pastoral needs? You're kind of serving a lot of needs all at once, and maybe you can't do it all at once for some each article, but at least that's the purpose of the quarterly.
Yeah, it is a difficult thing to balance. And maybe the special challenge is making sure we have things that are relevant to people in the ministry, as well as offering the opportunity for scholars who are pursuing something deeper but might not be of immediate interest to everyone, to have a way to publish what they're doing too. So those are our two purposes that we see. As far as that balance and what we publish, a lot of that's up to the faculty really, and to discussions that happen in the different faculty departments, saying what is it important for us to be working on and to be researching and making a statement about if something needs to be said. For example, last year we ran a series of articles on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of the Wisconsin Synod. So there was a lot of historical scholarship. In a recent issue, I think two published ago now, we had an article by Professor Sam Degner on an important New Testament textual and translation question that has an impact on systematic theology as well, and a very contemporary issue. So there's a balance of all of that. I don't want to give the impression that everything is operated by some sort of master plan. Really, there's serendipity too of what the articles that we receive. I'm happy to receive things at all times to consider for publication too.
Yeah, so that's part of the balancing too, is you want to speak to what people need or want to
Mm-hmm.
hear, but also allow expression or sharing of WELS scholarship. It sounds like that's kind of the
Yeah, we're happy for all those people who are doing deep dive into some topic of interest and willing to share that through their writing. You bet.
excellent. Well, let's go back now to some of those online resources that we just briefly mentioned, how the role of librarian has changed over time, or at least the resources have expanded. So one of the things I think, at least back in my day, 10-ish years ago, we talked about online resources. It almost always seemed like, well, that's the essay file,
Mm-hmm.
the essay file, and there's so much more in there as well. But for those unfamiliar, how would you describe what is on the online resources and what makes it unique or a special resource for us?
Sure, we do have close to 5,000 essays, I would say, but our total number of items are closer to 8,000 now. And so I really kind of want to start calling it a digital library rather than just an essay file to reflect the breadth of everything that is in there. And one thing that we're able to do that not every place is able to do is to be actively doing the process of digitizing through our student workers. That the seminary is blessed with wonderful scholarship funds, and some of what that goes to is to fund our student workers as well with on-campus jobs. And so we've been working all sorts of different things. Somewhat recently, we've been digitizing the early proceedings from the constituent synods of the WELS, so the early Wisconsin Synod and Michigan and Minnesota and Nebraska, and other of those early synods. We've done the back issues too of the Gemeindeblatt and the Northwestern Lutheran, which are the forerunners, Forward in Christ magazine that exists now. We've scanned the issues of Theologische Quartalschrift, which was what Wisconsin Lutheran Quarterly was formerly known as, and then we're working on digitizing other types of resources to books that are now in the public domain, some of the things that are most frequently accessed in our library or that will be useful to remote users that we think we can now digitize because there is no copyright on them anymore.
Yeah, I have to say, as a researcher and writer with one article in the quarterly, I don't know how I could have done that project
Mm-hmm.
without those resources. And every time I come back, I'm pleasantly surprised and say, oh, look, they've added another dozen since the last time I've come to the
You
site.
bet.
Those synodical records are quite something. And I know that you can't take that for granted when you're doing denominational history, that you can find those sort of things online. So, yeah, that's an excellent set of resources. I think you mentioned, but what are the documents people find most useful, would you say?
There's a principle in library science that says for every reader, their book. And what that means really is that different things are useful to different people. Our essay file and all the other digital resources, if you look at the logs, they are being accessed constantly, day and night. Much more usage of our digital resources than of our print resources, for example, if you just total up the number of checkouts, I suppose.
Hmm.
But for those digitized resources, there are researchers of every type who are finding them useful, whether it is those synod proceedings or old copies of Northwestern Lutheran. And I see some of that too through requests and emails that we get coming to the library. I see a little bit of glimpse of what people find useful. And so much of what we do is driven by demand or what we think will be useful to people. Some of it's also driven by archival purposes. For example, if you look at the physical copies of those old synodical proceedings on our shelves in the back room, they are crumbling. Every time we take them off the shelf, we have to vacuum the floor afterwards from all the
Mm.
pieces of paper that flake off. And so we're at the point where we're saying this is really important that we scan some of these things. There are old newspapers downstairs. If you unfold them, you're not going to fold them back up the same way that they came apart. So it's important to be digitizing some of these things just for preservation purposes.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the archival sort of resources that are on there. And once upon a time, the Synod archives were
Mhm.
right next door to the library at the seminary, and now they've since moved. What and it's kind of going off script here, but what's the nature of the relationship between the Synod archives and the seminary library? It seems like they're people will be coming to one or both for their projects.
Mhm. Yeah, we're really happy that it's over 5 years ago, getting close to 10 years ago, that the Synod archives were able to move to their own location. So we don't want to do the work, but because there's plenty of work to do. And now we have funding for an archivist and for all the things that need to take place to really do archives well. And so WELS Archives in Pewaukee handles all of physical artifacts that come from congregations and from the synod itself. The one thing that they don't really do is books, and so we handle all books unless the book itself has significance as a historical artifact. But if it's just there was a book in the collection, then it comes to us and we keep those things. But really, we work hand in hand to figure out what are priorities for digitization and how can we be a help of that. With the labor force that we have available in our students too, I think there's a good role that we can fill in the purpose of WELS archives as well, in making things like those synod histories available to the general public and to researchers.
Yeah, excellent. So, from your perspective, what makes the online document collection valuable for church historians or maybe even genealogists and seminary researchers?
I think it's like what you were saying, that it's just available from any place at any time. And if you are doing a research project, you don't have to wait until you're able to travel. You don't have to wait for someone else to go and do the scan. You can have your eyes on a copy of that document yourself right away. That saves labor overall and just makes more research possible too. I've really been impressed just at the volume of historical research that's coming out now and at the quality of it, that people are able to access resources not just from us but from other institutions too, and bring that all together in the scholarship that they are producing.
Yeah. So, speaking of how these projects that you've noticed, what sort of ones pop out to you that are maybe an example of making really good use of these resources?
Yeah, there was the recent article by Tim Grunmeyer from MLC on the origins of the Wisconsin Synod. Was that more due to the mission societies in Germany, or was it more due to the Pennsylvania Synod and its sending of pastors who had already been here in America? That synod existing for almost 100 years already before the
Hmm.
Wisconsin Synod got its start. And he was really able to bring in all kinds of different research for an amazing article that I think changes the narrative a little bit on the history of the Wisconsin Synod. I guess I'd say that the two things I see most directly myself are quarterly articles like that one, and articles that are published in other journals. Then also our senior thesis papers. Our seniors have to write not quite a full master's thesis, but a major paper as part of their senior year. And so they're making use of all sorts of resources. And depending on what they're doing, that might involve our digitized resources as well. But also then weekly and often daily, we get inquiries here in the library by email or by our online form from congregation members who are searching for some piece of information, from a pastor who's preparing a Bible class, from someone writing a congregational history, or just doing some personal project. And I don't necessarily see the results of what they're working on, but we know that we're often the place where people start their search, and we're happy to help them get started on their way.
Yeah, excellent. So, with thousands of documents spanning decades, if not centuries, how does the seminary ensure that this online archive is organized, searchable, and a little bit of quality control too of what goes in there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we do as far as the platform itself is concerned for our digital library is that we use a standard platform used in industry. There are a couple of them out there. Ours is called DSpace. Right now, our instance of it is in need of an upgrade, but once we do that, it's actually going to give us even more interoperability and sharing of resources with other online platforms, where there'll be someone searching at some other institution will be able to see more easily what we have out there, even if they don't know that we exist to begin with. The question, theologically trustworthy is always an interesting one, because the essay file really it's a library collection. Not everything in there has like someone's seal of approval as this is good theology. Many things do. Many things are there because they are things of theology that is in what we believe is full agreement with Scripture. Some things, though, are just library collection items too. This paper was written; it was the source of controversy, but we have it in our essay file, so it's accessible. I think one interesting thing for the future too will be putting like an AI-based chatbot on top of the essay file, so you can make inquiries of it But a question that goes with it then is, will a tool like that be sensitive to the maybe too casual researcher who is thinking this is a source of all theological truth or something like that, to distinguish, what is good and what should you question more? And I suppose the answer is always we should be questioning what we read to say, is this good? Is this true? Is this scriptural? And what purpose does it serve? So that's the platform itself. Then we categorize everything as best we can into topics online. So if you drill down, you'll find it. We also attach subject keywords, and then the DSpace search engine is able to make the full text of those digitized items searchable. We've also recently been using some AI-based tools to speed up the process of determining what is a resource really about, and to provide those keywords and make the search happen even a little bit better to help people dig down and find what they're really looking for.
Yeah, I think back in the old days, it was pretty much the title and the author, and then you had to kind of go from there, right? And
Right.
now,
Yeah.
you're helping us out a whole lot more with those searches. Yeah, I think you mentioned about kind of the challenging items in the collection is like the older documents, but what about something else like a challenging material to catalog? Is that something you run into?
So physically speaking, when we're doing the digitization, tightly bound books are a difficult thing. If we have multiple copies, maybe that's something that we can pull apart and scan, but some things we don't really want to do that with. And so it can be done. You have to do it one page at a time, flipping the book and using a special holder that holds it open at an angle. And then you have to kind of stitch that back together at the end. We do have software that helps with that. So that's one thing that's physically challenging. Another thing that's physically challenging is a multi-page foldout. So you've probably looked through the old synod proceedings, and there's a statistical report in there or the budget report, and that they actually, I don't know if they hand stitched that in at the time or what, but you take that and folds out several pages. How do you
Uh,
scan that and at the same time put it in a document with all the other single page items? So that's always an interesting question to handle, and there's maybe not a good answer, but we try to do it as best we can. So that's the physical aspect. There's also the cataloging itself or the indexing. And there, any unique item, something that no one has indexed before, we have to do for the first time. And we have the question, are we going to do a real quick job of that? Or are we going to go into detail? If you're going to properly catalog something, that actually takes hours of work. There are people at the Library of Congress who are employed to do this, but they don't get to absolutely everything. And so some things are up to us, and they might use our record for what they put online for others. And there I'm really grateful for the work of our assistant librarian, Laura Guzman, for all the work that she does to make that possible, take the time to go through a book and figure out what are the things that you need to say so that other people can make use of that catalog record too.
yeah. So a lot of hours behind the scenes, maybe we take it for granted what's out
Yeah,
there, but yeah, a lot of hard work.
you bet.
So when I sometimes I ask researchers this sort of question when they're doing the research, what's something that excites them when they find it? But what about you, just with the knowledge of our library collection? What are some buried treasures, whether it be essays, papers, or documents that you wish more people knew about, or maybe you just find interesting?
Yeah, I find fascinating just the physical aspect of some of the old books and their uniqueness. A few years ago, one of our students who was really interested in our rare book room that has a few thousand items was interested in finding out more about what was there. And I thought a good question to answer would be let's take a look at our oldest items. So we have like 30 items that are from before 1530 or so. And let's ask, how rare are those items? Are there 1,000 other copies in the world, or are there no other copies in the world? And we actually found a couple of things that we have the only copy or the only intact
Wow.
copy in the world. Also, a recently donated item was in that category too. So we have this 1529 pamphlet called a Practica Teutsch, written by Anton Brellox, who is a Lutheran in the city of Swabish Hall. And it's like the old Farmer's Almanac of the
Hmm.
16th century. It's really the exact same thing. So, astrological based predictions, which at the time Lutherans were kind of okay with, maybe. And so we have the only good copy of that. The University of Kiel in Germany has another copy, but it's in shreds after some water damage that happened to it. And so we were able to help them piece theirs back together and publish our copies, our images online. We have another example where there's an not interlinear, but a two-language face-to-face page, German and Latin edition of Luther's Catechism.
Hmm.
And it's not a particularly early edition, but it's actually an earlier edition than anyone that was previously known for this publication. And so we were able to add that to an online index of all the books that are known from the 16th and 17th centuries. We don't have any like first edition Luther publications. You'd have to go to Concordia, St. Louis, or to the seminary in Atlanta, forgetting the name right now off the top of my head, or to some other collections to find things like that. Concordia Mequon here has a couple things as well. But we do have first editions of Chemnitz, like an examination, the Council of Trent, first editions, the Book of Concord, which is really neat to see. You hear in catechism class growing up, Lutheran confessions, they're in the Book of Concord. Well, we have it here. And also of those Orthodox Lutheran theologians like Gerhard and Caleb and Quenstedt, we have their first editions too. So those are some of the, I guess, the treasures that you have. We also have a first edition of Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, which is an interesting thing that's in our library as well.
Yeah, fascinating. And just, for those who haven't pieced it together, all of these well predate the Wisconsin Synod, right? So kind of the stories of how this body of theological knowledge, the physical library, was brought over here, or maybe someone bought it on auction 10 years ago and donated it. I'm not sure how that all pieces together, but I know sometimes you could read the inscriptions in the cover of these books and have a whole kind of ownership genealogy of who all owned this book before it got to the library.
These are books that people brought over on boats 150 years ago or so, and they've been here ever since. There's one collector who brought a bunch of things together. I don't have a whole lot of provenance information on the collection, but those are a couple of the big sources. Yep.
Yeah, fascinating. So, somewhat related then, any items or a collection that's changed your own personal understanding of a period in WELS history?
I found it interesting to look through some of those old Wisconsin Synod proceedings and just to see how things actually transpired in the early years. And my own facility with German is fairly limited. I'm more of a Latin person, but I try to hack through it as best as I can. And new tools like Google Lens really help a lot too. They can just scan the page and it tells you the basics of what's there. Anyway, so I think that's fascinating to look through. One particular tidbit is that much of the early history of Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary is actually contained in the president's report to the Synod Convention in those early Wisconsin Synod proceedings. We actually don't have many internal records from those early years, apart from like grade books, where it says, yep, this person did enough in this class, was a little lacking in this class, but still good, things like that. But as far as actually what's the history of the institution, we depend on those president's reports to the Synod for a lot of that. There was one year when Adolf Heinecke, early president, later in his life said, I suppose I should really write down all the names of all the students who have graduated so far. And so some of his records are really key to understanding things.
Yeah, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first decade or so of the Wisconsin Synod proceedings were all in manuscript form. Like there weren't even enough people where they needed to print them off, or they went to a local print shop or something. So taking for granted.
I'm amazed at how much institutions actually did go to print shops for those fairly early. But yes, I think here in our library, we just have typed up versions of that, and maybe Weld Archives has the handwritten ones. I know recently some people were looking for the Minnesota Synod early proceedings, and we have like 1867 or 68 and beyond. Gettysburg has 1864 through 1867. And if there's anything from 1860 to 1864, it's in someone's attic somewhere, as far as we know right now.
Yeah, best case scenario, it's still there.
Right, best case.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Yeah. So you mentioned the process now. So, you open up these old papers and they're literally falling apart, perhaps just due to the age or the material or a various combination of factors. You mentioned that process of scanning. Are there any collections online, though, that you hope to add in the future? What's in the works right now?
Yeah, we have a few things in the works. So what's really sped this along is that we were blessed a few years ago with the gift needed to purchase a professional book scanner. That helps us to do the process much more efficiently and with good color matching, good resolution. What we do is we do the scanning. You can do about 3 seconds per page if it's a book that cooperates with that kind of speed. We keep a copy locally of the high resolution image master scan, but then we make a PDF that goes into the digital library. And that publishing process, then, that does lag the scanning just a bit because it takes time for our student workers to go through that and post those. Yeah, so right now we've done a bunch of those early synod proceedings, and we've moved on now to the synodical council, the synodical conference proceedings. So that organization that united the Wisconsin and Missouri and Norwegian and other synods together for a good period of time, getting their minutes online. We think that J.P. Kaler's History of the Wisconsin Synod, which was not published by WELS, we think that is actually in the public domain now, so we're hoping to put that online soon.
Okay.
And in the basement of the library, I mentioned this a little bit before, but we have boxes of these old Lutheran periodicals that have not been digitized. They're only out there on microfilm, if anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there comes a day when we run out of our own materials, there's plenty more to be done and plenty of fascinating things to be found there. One big thing that we're working on is actually not something that involves WELS materials and not something that even involves physical materials that we're handling. We're working on producing some digital editions of the systematic theology works of Abraham Kalov and Johannes Quenstedt, those early Orthodox Lutheran theologians that I mentioned before. So Concordia has put out the Gerhard series. We're going to be putting out open access, Kalov and Quenstedt. And so far we have had the students work through the editing of the first 2 volumes of Kalov, and we're hoping to get those online soon in a digital edition interface. And so what we do is we use digital images that are available from a German university. Even though we have some of those books, they've already digitized them, so we're using their images. And then we're using the Transcribus software to do the recognition of the text, and then students are checking it out. Students who know the Latin are checking it out to check for errors. And we'll put that online then. So you'll have the image and the transcription side by side. And we'll also probably provide a translation that will be done by some AI tool, just a rough translation. So someone who can't easily read through the Latin and other original languages that are there can at least find their place in the document and find what they're looking for. So that's what we're working on.
That's excellent. Yeah. So just a follow-up question on that then. I've tried to use Transcribus with varying degrees of success. I know it's not free, right? And you're paying students to do this. Where does this funding come from? I don't know if you can disclose that or not, but it's good to see that someone is willing to invest in this sort of work for our seminary and our synod.
Sure. There are generous donors to the Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary Library, and so we're very happy for that. And we're able to make use of some of those funds to pay for those costs of someone else is running a server somewhere that's doing this high performance computing. It's AI based computing. So when you hear data centers and things like that are being built, it's that type of infrastructure that's behind this. Not for ChatGPT. It's a very specific tool to that task that people have built. And it is a consortium of scholars that do this, but there are costs, and so we pay that. It's actually not a huge cost, so we think it's really worth it for what we're able to do to make this happen. And there's a growing interest in kind of this age of theology and some of the work that was produced there. So we're hoping to make that available to people.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. Yeah. So, another follow-up question that just came to me. What's kind of the turnaround? How many items are you, and I'm sure it varies obviously with length and challenges and all that, but how often are new resources being put up that are being scanned and cataloged?
Yeah, you reminded me of something I wanted to add with the Kalov and Quenstedt too, and your own experience working with Transcribus, and what's the error rate. So one part of what we do is we actually train the model. So there is an AI model that has been based on people scanning millions of pages of all sorts of documents from that era. But we've actually taken that model. Now we train it ourselves. So every page that we transcribe and correct, we add back to this model and rerun it. And now it's at the point where it rarely makes a mistake in the transcription of a letter. And in fact, it often identifies if there's a mistake in the manuscript, like they put a letter upside down
Hmm.
or put the wrong letter in, which is somewhat rare, but it does happen. It'll actually identify the places where that
Wow.
happens. So that actually helps to make the process much faster. So like volume one of Calov took us most of last year, but we were done with volume two early on this year, just because that process speeds up. So I'd say we're talking in the terms of months for the process of some resource. It depends on the number of pages involved, but say, so Nebraska Synod minutes we did recently. I don't know if they're up on the essay file
I think
now.
there, yeah.
So that was a matter of, the scanning itself doesn't take that many days, but then to process all of it and catalog it takes a few more. So we're talking a couple of months for each resource.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
And this Kalov and Quenchit project is going to be years because there are 12 volumes of Kalov, and we're getting on to number 3 right now after in our second year. Hoping to speed it up as we go along, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, with the learning curve there. Yeah. And of course your seminarian students, helpers aren't there for the long term either. So you have to train them again, I guess, when you get a new set. But
Right. So we have new
yeah.
guys coming in, but also guys coming back from year to year too sometimes. So that helps and training the next class of guys to work on it.
Yeah, and just an aside there, hopefully these guys who are doing this work now are, they're intimately familiar with archival resources and show an interest in the
Yeah,
material and,
and I
and
wish I
use it.
knew as much about Kalov as they do now because they're looking at it every day.
Yeah, yeah, just fascinating. Glad they have that opportunity. A little jealous, honestly. I didn't have
Right.
that as a job option for my seminary days. Well, kind of getting towards the end here, but you mentioned different people who use the resources, including congregational historians, whether pastors or members. What advice do you have for a volunteer historian in a small congregation, trying to make sense of not only their archives at home as well as the seminary archives?
Yeah, I'm not an archival specialist, so I don't know how directly I can speak to this. I think you've had Sue Willems, our WELS
Hmm.
archivist, maybe on the podcast before, and she can give some great guidance there. I think with the WELS 150th anniversary, they published some resources too. But I think the biggest thing is to be able to set aside some time and to do that actual research and just sort things out, figure things out. My mother did genealogical research for many years, and there's really just this discovery process that I saw her doing, where you make the connections and you write down what you're able to find out is true, and then you leave that all for the next person. So yeah, to do the research, sort things out, establish timelines, make connections, and then making it useful for future resources, just as much annotation and description as you can do with the things that you have discovered. That helps the next person coming to that archival folder to figure out what is this and how can I relate it to other things that I'm looking at now. I think that's really the key.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that advice and a good reminder. There are resources, and I helped put together some of those, mostly from Concordia Historical Institute, though, how to do your own research for a congregation. And I would encourage anyone doing that to, well, make use of the synod-based resources they may find at the seminary library as well as local sources as well. And now maybe this ties together both your work as the library director and the quarterly editor. But from your perspective, what new trends or directions do you see emerging in recent WELS historical research?
Yeah, there has been an interest in what exactly happened and what were all the dynamics happening in those early years and with immigration too in our country. There's also been a few people really interested in their early presidential letters. Tim Grunmeyer's research that I mentioned before on the founding of the Wisconsin Synod and the
Hmm.
roots of the Wisconsin Synod made use of a lot of those private letters that are in the WELS archives. And I think that is an era that deserves some more attention, maybe to anticipate a question of yours here. One one thing that's really neat in the world of digital humanities, which is kind of my research interest, is that there are new digital tools that you can use to analyze communication networks. So I think a really interesting future project, whether that's someone doing a PhD or whether it's just grassroots researchers, is to try to tie together these early presidential letters and create that communications network map. using some of the technological and AI-based tools that are now available to really bring that all together. I'd be eager to see someone doing that, and eager to help in whatever way I can to make that happen.
Yeah. I'm kind of picturing the guy with the map on the wall with the string and the thumbtacks
Mm-hmm.
going to different people. But yeah, you're talking about using some modern tools. But yeah, what are all the connections, influences, and contacts is what you're getting at.
And it's a really complex network to study, and timing of letters going back and forth in the mail or by boat and things like that, and mapping all that. But there are tools now to make that a lot easier to process and to analyze too. And so I think that the time is right for that to happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fascinating idea of what could happen. I guess let's maybe wrap up with just kind of words of advice or encouragement here. What encouragement would you have or give to pastors, teachers, or laypersons who want to deepen their engagement with WELS history or theological scholarship?
Sure. If you're talking WELS history specifically, I think just an invaluable resource are the new volumes from Jim Langbartels, the translated volumes of the early proceedings and prehistory of the Wisconsin Synod. For people who may not be familiar with German or able to read that off the page, that these things are really key for understanding that era. And so we're so thankful for his work and for making those available. But really, anything that you're interested in, I just say to people that there is opportunity there to choose something that interests you and to make that your thing. And libraries are there to help you do that. That's what we're here for. We have the time, we have the resources to point you in the right direction to find the things that you need and to make your own little contribution to understanding our history and our theology, good biblical theology, and all those other good things that God gives us to pursue.
All right, excellent. Wonderful concluding remarks there and some direction for us. Thank you, Professor Erickson, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. So happy to share these things with you and everyone today.